selectively mute.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be a problem so far.
Yeah, it shouldn't. The microphone's fairly good, so it should cut it out.
Plus, we've got a little bit of Minions music in the background. Okay, we are live. So, greetings, friends. This is Maryland, and my guest today is Sombre. We're going to have a chat about Warhammer Ogres. So, just for the start, I'll open up the latest bit of single player I was trying. So I think, yeah, if we have a look here, I mean, this is the bless I paid for, right? And to have halfway reasonable scales, I use Dormant, and then with the Bloody Mother, oh, she's awake, so we can have a look at, there she is. So there we go. So that's an expensive bless, you know, unquestionably. See that all right, Sombre?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm playing in a game at the moment which has got 12 Warhammer Nations in it. It's got this version of Ogres in it, and their expansion's gone okay, and it seems like they've taken... I think they took an Awake Pretender, or they've got a Bless on it that doesn't... It's not an Incarnate. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But, I think they've been a bit underwhelmed by the performance of the Pit Fighters, because I think they put quite a lot into the Bless. So once you do that, and you know, this is... It's not a cheap Bless by any means, you know, it's pretty
This
good.
one? No, this one's quite expensive.
If you do that and then your Sacred's underperforming, then it's a terrible thing.
Yeah. I mean, here's a battle with some of them. I don't know, I don't remember. Oh, it's basically just pit fighters. There's a couple of man-eaters in there.
I'd expect them to do fine here. I mean,
yeah, this is just javelins and, you know, miscellaneous junk.
Yeah, and they're almost unkillable for Lion Trove. They just can't hit them hard enough. So this is regen and gives them 10% regeneration.
Blood Vengeance. Yeah, Blood Vengeance.
So obviously regen and Blood Vengeance synergize because you're expecting to take damage and then you're consistently taking a bit of damage and you're getting a bit of Blood Vengeance back. There is a little bit of anti-synergy with the Pit Fighters because they're pretty high protection. So even though they are like a big bag of hit points,
yeah, 20 protection is
hit incredibly hard. So sometimes the Blood Vengeance isn't doing that much.
No, I think you know, the longer term concept behind the Blood Vengeance. It was Fogmind and I were doing something towards the end of the third episode. We were just kind of brainstorming, you know, what are options that might be interesting. The idea here was this is more against when you meet up against evocations and things like that and magi.
Right.
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure that, you know, it's hard to sort of proof this out against just the AI. So, and my expansion was okay. It wasn't stunning. There was a comment during the stream when I was showing this that this was not the most amazing expansion, and it's not. You know, and the other thing with pit fighters, they're very expensive, even with turmoil.
They are very expensive. Yeah, and a thing to remember is with the turmoil discount. So I think is it 135, and then turmoil discount is minus 45. So they're 90 gold in turmoil 3.
Right, and that puts them right up there with...
I wish Dominion showed this. There's actually an interesting thing you pointed out with the Death Belchers. If you hover over the Death Belcher,
yeah,
it doesn't show you the turmoil discount. It just calculates it. So the 40 gold includes the turmoil discount, which is 15.
Isn't that weird?
And the reason for that is because they have a recruitment limit that needs to be expressed in that string.
Okay.
It just cuts out one of the steps and shows you the summary of the gold cost instead.
Okay.
They have a recruitment limit.
So that's just a limitation of the engine. And hey, yeah, Lucid just dropped by, so you may not. Yeah, he just said, "Hey, dudes." So, because you probably can't see the. Well, you could watch this if you want it on YouTube instead of here. Just make sure your volume's off. But either way, so he's the first guy to drop by. Yeah, that's an interesting comment about not everything is shown here. So I guess, I'm just kind of showing to you, and you've already kind of seen this, in choosing to go with a dormant pretender and an immobile in this blast, and this is the cheapest way to make this blast. What I've sacrificed is my first year's expansion was okay, but not stunning. Whereas it's pretty obvious that just man-eaters and death belchers, and then bulls and iron fists, you can expand just fine. You don't need any sacreds.
I think a thing that I go for in the Warhammer Mod Nations, and this is partly just because I'm representing everything from the tabletop version, but partly just because I like this, is that troops are kind of specialized in different directions a bit more than typical Dominions ones are. So the nice thing about the Ogres is that you've pretty much got a specialist troop to deal with any particular type of indies that
That's
you're
right.
going to run into.
Well, I made the comment today, I think, or it was during the Blitz. It was after the Blitz, and somebody else was talking about it, and I said, oh, it was Lucid and I were talking earlier today. We were recording for the tournament, and I commented that one of the things I've noticed in your mods, and we found it brutally exhausting in a Blitz, there are no junk troops. all of the troops. Well, but normally you're kind of used to a vanilla nation. You're only going to buy 4 of the 15 different units. You're not going to bother with most of the rest of them. So then you don't have to think about them in a blitz. Here we are trying to blitz, and there's 4 of us, and all playing nations we don't know well, and we're getting tired, just because every single turn, every single bit of recruitment, you're making decisions.
Yeah, and I mean, I hope that when I'm seeing this with people playing Warhammer Nations, is that you get to use a bit more of a variety of troops, because I think that is more interesting. It's got a bit more of a learning curve.
I think it's very much more interesting.
And I think there's a tendency amongst Dominions players, they'll kind of look at it and they'll go, okay, so which one of these has been priced wrongly? Which one of these is too cheap? I'll get that one. Which one of these, is a little bit stronger than it should be? I'll get that. So they try to do that. It's like it's like velociraptors testing the fence. They're like, where's the weak point in this lineup? I want this. And when people do that, I'll then go, oh, okay, I think I need to tweak the price of that a bit then, so that it's not an obvious choice over the other things. And people's reaction is kind of like, oh no, I like using those.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. My only comment is that that was heavy to blitz with. That was definitely on the heavy side for blitzing. It's not a problem in normal play at all. But blitzing is a somewhat unique kind of way to play.
I think I would equate it to Warhammer Nations tends to be a little bit more like Ind than they are like Maragnon.
Well,
there's a bit more going on. They tend to have more foreign recruitment. They tend to have a few mechanical things going on and a more variety of viable troops.
I agree with you there, and give Illwinter credit. I think Illwinter has moved towards the direction of nations have less just sort of generic things that were tossed in maybe as their flavor, and more they're making their nations that there's a niche for each of the units that they include in each of the magi. Like a classic is, I play quite a bit of the monkey nations, and they've, especially the later ones, have a notorious selection of all kinds of different Atavis, none of which are really particularly all that good. And
there's kind of like a thematic thing going on in some of those where some nice little bits like those with the sword. The sword is the mark of royalty, and the other weapons are kind of the lower castes and things, and it gives you a sense of the nation. But then you just go, okay, well they're all bad except for this one, so I'll just recruit this.
Right. So I don't think there's much more to say about this one here. I think you could do Blood Vengeance. I hadn't quite gotten to where I was trying to pump out Morphines, and we just talked briefly before we started that down here, Maw Tribe, this is very cost effective. 8 for 28. They're medium protection, lots of hit points, so regen makes a great deal of sense. Now, in hindsight, I think what I'll do is I'll jump out, back to design. So the other one that we talked about that sort of takes advantage of a similar idea was jumping here to, again, nature and blood is a good combination, but then just go blood 5, I think, for blood bond. Do the dormant again and the regeneration. Now
Yeah,
this, I think, that saves, how many points are we saving here? Right, so that's, sorry, I'm not doing it. 189 drops us to 69. So that's 120 points. So that's three more scales, which would make a significant difference. Clearly you want turmoil, because I could have used more production, that's for sure.
Yeah. So an interesting thing that you've got to balance when you're playing as the ogres is they've got these they've got actually pretty strong foreign recruitment.
They do.
To reinforce up your armies. It's not going to be in turmoil scales usually, and it's you have this kind of struggle at the start to push your scales and get the turmoil out there because they
That's right.
have dying dominion and can't preach. They have to blood sacrifice. So sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes you would go, okay, there's only one point of turmoil in this province, I can do it, or maybe you'll even pay the full price for some things sometimes. But I think that the fact that early on, even though you've got this foreign recruitment, you need to be recruiting the things in Turmoil 3, really puts more pressure on your cap to just be cranking stuff out at the start. So
yes, it does.
I was considering, so even though you don't have, so I think the best way of putting this, I think the choke point usually is resources early on.
It has been in my
kind
testing.
of an argument having high production.
Yes, it has been in my testing that resources were, because Death Belchers, once I sort of got the hang of using them and putting them up front, they were doing a really good job against large amounts of fairly soft troops. Not so good against, say, cavalry or things like that. But when you want to quickly clear a large amount of soft troops, so Death Belchers, I didn't use the two-handed guys because I was short of production. So yeah, something like this, and then I debated whether I wanted luck. I think you really want growth because you're going to blood hunt like crazy.
Yeah, and I think growth is a very popular. It's a really hard sell to get people not to take growth, honestly.
Well, the analysis is pretty clear. Like after about turn 30, it's worth more than any other scale for gold. Get more scale out of growth.
If you're in a blitz, don't worry about it so much. But since most games go to maybe turn 70, 80 can happen, then yeah, growth is going to pay.
Well, we're sure noticing that tournament type games, which are all very sweaty players, are running into the 100 very easily, consistently, because people just don't give up.
Yeah, they don't, you can see the opportunities, and I think if you've got very high research, there's always these little. You can get a lever in and just make a huge gain for yourself.
That's right.
You see that in some of those tournament games.
Yeah, you sure do.
A lot of territory.
Well, especially those magical 6s and 7s. Lucid and I talked quite a bit about that. That at the research levels of 6 and 7s, there's a whole bunch of really critical battle-changing spells come out. The 8s and 9s, they're good, but they're a lot harder to get to. So you see we've really seen a lot of shifts as somebody hits a target at a research 6 or a research 7. That's fog wars, foul vapors.
Foul vapors Foul vapors isn't even earlier access, isn't it? People talk a lot about foul vapors and wailing winds being these. They're kind of too cheap, too easy to get to. And, I kind of agree with that, but.
Yeah, a lot of the balance mods shift them up at least to a 7, and I think that's a reasonable decision.
You can have a window where you've got multiple turns where you've got fog warriors, and they don't have. Maybe they don't. They're not going to have difficulty getting fog warriors anyway, but they don't have any equivalent to it, and you will just stomp them in army fights.
That's right. Yeah. So now we could take a look here. Anyways, this was an interesting idea. Do you have any favorite pretenders that you've tried with ogres, things that you've enjoyed using? I'm not going to say optimized, just more like, things that you think are fun. with the nation?
Yeah. So I mean, a thing for me is that I actually quite like, and this is something that I'm using in my current game, is I quite like to take an Awake Pretender, even if
Mhm.
Nation's got okay expansion already. I like having the threat of it there. I like, that I could maybe utilize it to do a bit of a rush.
Well, I saw in your video, and that's with Skaven, you've got the Devi of Darkness, which is,
Yeah.
well, it's an Awake I've used a lot, much the same way as you have. Give it a little more earth, bump its protection, the built-in fear, and when you can, give it a splash of gear.
Yeah.
See, the one here, the Dracon, is always a very solid one, and Earth and Nature is always a very solid set of paths. So there's lots of inexpensive things you can do with the Dracon, like a real
Yeah.
quick. Let's get rid of these. Just a 4 and 4, or a 5 and 4. That's
Yeah, I
fire
think
shock, and then poison resistance with low light. These sorts of things. That's viable.
yeah, you could maybe go the regen. I mean, you can go kind of the regen route, but it's very expensive. Obviously, regen opens up for you um, getting turbo communions going.
Well, I did a regen in a game where I dropped the earth to 2 to pay for it, and I didn't bother with Thirst Bless. I just went with regen. I just went earth 2 so it could eventually earth power. I was using the boar instead, but this works
Same
as
principle.
an awake expander, and then you muck with your
Yeah.
scales until you get them where they work.
Now, an interesting thing with the ogres is that you've got really quick access to point buffing with regeneration because
Yes.
national spells is troll guts.
Yes.
It's worth noting that that stacks with regeneration from bless, so you don't need to think, oh, I can get the regeneration anyway. I mean, there is a benefit to having both of them. Really get 20% regen at that point.
Now I think if we pop back out just briefly on that question, we'll just open that game for a second. I believe Troll Guts is Blood 2, so you can do it with a Butcher. Or does it require a Slaughter Master?
I think
it does require a Slaughter Master. It's a Blood 3.
You're right, it's 3, yeah.
Yeah,
and
so
it's H2 as well, so it's impossible for the Butchers to cast it even in it.
So
you
you could. The only slowdown for that is, are you ready to roll Slaughter Masters out with the battle?
Against, yeah, I mean that's technology for War 1. It's not for expansion, really.
No,
it's too slow.
And the beauty of regen on expansion is just reducing attrition. I mean, that's the beauty there. But like I said, man eaters do a fine job, especially once you can get enough of them. If you can get that second fort. And I never got around to trying out the Mournfang. I mean, these guys look as powerful, but more powerful than pit fighters, really, because they're even
they're
higher kill rate.
Hard hitting. Yeah, and you've got a leg 4 weapon going on there as well, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm not sure. People haven't used them that much because they're very expensive. You're limited to 1 a turn because they're these very rare things for the ogres. So I don't know. We'll see about them. It may be that they need a bit more incentivizing.
Well, maybe 1 a turn might be a little low, only if you wanted to try to use them for expansion, because really, I think in a new build I would go, like I said, higher production, and then be looking at Iron Guts, Man Eaters, and Belchers, because you can get a good start with just Bulls and Iron Fists. What kind of slows you down? The attrition's fairly high on the Bulls. They do the job. You just got to keep replacing them.
I think 1 Mournfang in your initial expansion group. So let's say you've got your starting army.
Mm-hmm.
I think having 1 Mournfang added to that starting army to then expand on after you've waited 1 turn. I think that set on attack rear actually might be fairly good. Although you might just be better off just adding more stuff to the main block of troops. I'm not sure.
Well, I was running mostly sloth builds in my first 2 tests, but and if we were to see, I would probably, I know I would not normally a nation with so much powerful killing stuff you could get everywhere, I don't think I'd be picking an Awake Expander for this nation. But there's no reason you
probably
can't.
wouldn't go that way either. If I were trying to be optimal, I would probably go for a Dormant. I don't think that I would use Pit Fighters. I wouldn't lean on Pit Fighters for expansion.
Me either.
I see why people do, because people hate taking attrition in expansion.
Right.
And they, when you look at a nation, people are trained by Dominions to go, what's the sacred like? And then they go, what's the most elite troop like? That's probably what you use to expand.
See, you could do
I don't
this.
think that's the case for ogres.
You could do something like this. You have to go one more for Stygian Flash. But if we went Stygian Flash, and then Poison Resistance, Low Light Vision, probably more Poison Resistance, and then Blood Surge. How much
invulnerability does Stygian Flesh give you?
12, 10, but against non-magic weapons, it stacks with your natural protection. So Lucid brought this up. Yes, Lucid brought this up in a game. It partially stacks. It doesn't add exactly 10, but late age Atlantis' Arcertuts, we bumped them up, I think, 6 points in protection, or maybe it was only 4. But when you're already up there in the relatively high, adding another 4 makes you all but invulnerable to most of the stuff you'll meet during expansion.
Yeah, I thought that it took whichever was higher of natural prot or invulnerability, and then
it doesn't
attach that to normal armor prot.
I think that's what it used to do. I think that's what it used to do, but no, it doesn't.
So if you get natural protection on a virtue, it'd be bonkers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty
I'll
amazing.
Have to try that out.
Yeah, so this one, could work, right? Go Dormant, pretty good scales. Afford some growth. Afford some production. Decent. See, we don't need huge Dominion. Probably 5 is good. If it's higher, it just overrides it. So just said if it's higher, it just this would be something to check out. But I'm just tossing out here, some ideas for a Dormant Titan. The other one is the Great Mother. She does a fine job if you got to go fight. I'm not thinking the Father of Winters, except adding air magic. It doesn't gain us much. So of the Titans available,
it's always nice to have like a high air pretender in your pocket for later in the game, but yeah, it's not. In terms of a bless, I don't think there's anything you particularly want.
No, and I don't think I'd go for a pure blood Titan. So I'd be looking, if I wanted a splash of blood on the Titan, I'd go with the Mother of Monsters. But she's cold-blooded, so that isn't awesome with the Cold Nation. So
that's true.
Yeah, I definitely probably just skip something along the lines of something like this, which is similar to what we were looking at. But I think you could do fine with a very minimal bless, or just go with a mage bless.
So what would you go with the earth?
Probably reinvigoration twice.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like reinvigoration because it's very handy to have on morphines when you get to them.
It's always useful.
Mages.
Yeah, it's always useful.
I'm not sure how relevant it is on the. I mean, it is somewhat on the pit fighters, but they're going to get tired anyway because they berserk.
Right,
so
but they're either going to kill or die. I think their killing power is so high. They're either going to kill everything or they're going to be killed. I don't know if they've got an in-between mode. They seem like one of those units that just doesn't have an in-between mode.
Yeah, they can kind of sit at the front and chip away at stuff a little bit. I mean, they hit very hard, so to just keep mulch things. They're pretty durable. If you have regen on them, I think that's the big difference. Once they've got regen on them, they really, really are hard to kill. But
yeah, but what I'm thinking is what's going to take them out before reinvigoration comes into play is battle magic, evocations and stuff like that, or or things like that.
Yeah,
So
you've got yeah, I mean, and there's something to be said for going for. This is my most hated bless in the game. I think it's a really boring pick, which is fire and shock resistance, um, FSR as people call it.
absolutely, it works. It's perfectly
It's
good.
fantastic. It's too good, probably, but it is very boring.
Yeah,
And,
it is boring.
Yeah,
But
if you were trying to be optimal, I think that probably is quite attractive on the ogres because you can get that down on your pit fighters, and then if your opponent's rolling out, fire and shock, then suddenly you've got these troops that, I mean, particularly they're almost invulnerable to fire at that point because they have so much protection anyway.
right. Well, I think in the case of something like this, I wouldn't find this terribly boring for the fact that I'm not actually leveraging my sacreds as the primary activity. This is effectively a scales build to me, like a fine-tuned scales
Yeah,
build.
it's
And the bless is sort of just a secondary factor.
I would take luck. If you can
Yeah.
get any points for it,
Well,
luck 3 is the way I would go for it.
I was going with magic the last time, but no, see, this is looking really good. Can I get 6? Not quite. So there we go. So, I mean, if we were to just quickly whip this one, have a quick look. What was that map I was using? It's actually, no, I can't use that one.
There is one very nice benefit to Magic, particularly for ogres, is that they've got a couple of really low-level research goals that make a huge difference to the early game.
They do.
And if you take Magic, you end up with Blood 1 for free, and it makes a big difference.
But, oh, here we go. This one's kind of just a very generic. So this is Ogre's Titan. Let's grab ogres here quickly. Gold Tooth, where'd he go? Where'd he go? There he is. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Just give it a shot. Oh, I didn't save that Pretender God, so I'll just quickly make her.
You've got the scales still loaded in pretty much, haven't you? They're off.
Yeah, so that saves a little time. So just saying that if we went with the fire shock resist, low light vision, I mean, the low light should help. They have the 25% dark vision, but then grab a little
and because
more
they
production.
berserk, you can cope a little bit better with darkness than some other stuff.
Yeah, there we go. I don't care what she's called. And then I'll just turn off thrones. Start, maybe I'll put on a little bit of events. And for testing, I like score graphs on just to see how I'm doing.
Sure, yeah. It's kind of interesting to see if the AI has completely failed to expand, which happens sometimes.
Well, the first one I had Ashdod, and it was running around with Anakites, and it didn't bother sending priests. I'm like,
yeah,
good grief.
It does know not to do that, but I guess it gets its priorities wrong sometimes.
See, the first time I was actually making some of the diversity magi off the bat, and then but I just wanted to look at them. Now I realize you really don't want those for a while. You just got to get butchers. So we get our 2.
I would maybe make my turn 1 purchase Slaughtermaster, purely for the fact that he can get you doing the full strength blood sacrifice.
That's a good point.
I think what's your blood slave income is it 2 or 3?
Well, it's 4, I think.
4. Yeah, there you go. So
yeah,
Slaughtermaster he's level 2 and he's got +1, so he does 3 slaves turn, and I would just have that going the entire game.
Yeah,
Slaughtermaster in the capital doing it.
And we could afford 1 Belcher. Wow, we could afford 1 something else. It doesn't really matter what it is. And that kind of gets us a kickstart. Profit this guy. And let's see, just classic stuff. This is a big farm, so probe it. Let this roll. Okay, so that's heavy cavalries. Chances are I can probably take those, but I've got some easier things to take first off. So
probably want the Jaguar tribe, I guess, on this.
Yeah,
I would go with.
And then I basically, to get this guy some experience, let's just cast Zone Blessing. Not that it matters much, and then just run some smites.
Yeah, they don't need the Summon of Courage or anything like that.
No. And then I just
That's something I have to do with Skaven.
I just blobbed him in the front. And then the other thing I sort of realized, so we've got this guy going, can kind of skip research for the time being. Get him blood sacrifice.
You should give him 3 slaves.
Can he use 3?
He gets a +1 on blood sacrifice, yeah.
He does. Error on my... Yeah, so the income is 4 per turn. So, good point. I think you're right on a Slaughtermaster off the bat. And yeah, let's go for the Jaguars. And then very quickly I built a Tyrant. But I think for now, so I can get a second party out, we'll swap over.
So how much? I mean, I'm interested that you're always going for the Anteaters, which they are very good gold to resources ratio. If you're resource starved, you get good troops from those. But have you tried?
Oh yeah, we've got production on.
Guts at all? Yeah, because we've got a little bit more resources. So the reason that I like
that works.
If you take a look at the Iron Guts, that's the 2-handed sword.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like they don't look like they'd be great, but they just have that little bit of extra protection over the others, which I find is enough to mean that they don't pick up very many afflictions. They do really well.
Yeah. That's significant. I mean, 17 to 12 is pretty significant because you're going to meet an awful lot of spear guys, an awful lot of short bows, and they're going to chip through 12, and they're going to almost completely bounce on 17.
The other thing is that they, because they're length 2, they sometimes get repels on. I mean, not against spears, but on short weapons they'll get repels, and they cannot be repelled by some of those. There's not many length 2 weapons, but they can't be repelled by them.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm okay with that, because I ran out of gold anyways. Now I could get a Tyrant instead of the Butcher, because I kind of found the sooner you get a Tyrant, the sooner you can start getting experience. But then I had more than a few of my Tyrants get a chest wound, which was, well, maybe not more than a few, but a couple of them. And that was kind of awkward. So, anyways, we'll just kind of look at this. Right, so very minimal loss. You know, we lost a single Iron Fist. And that was just with a super simple, more or less no scripting whatsoever, just a blob.
Yeah, and people hate any kind of attrition when they're expanding. I've really noticed this about Dominions players, is it's become completely accepted wisdom that you just don't want like any attrition. People are very averse to it. Yeah,
really?
I see it all the time. People will go for the most elite troop, and they'll be a little bit... It's okay to be cautious, you know, that makes sense, but...
Oh, I'm okay with some attrition, as long as it's not...
An Iron Fist, it's
like it's
25 gold in Turmoil 3, like, who cares? That's...
Yeah. Yeah, that fine. No, I don't tend to fuss too much over a moderate amount of attrition, 1 or 2, as long as you can replace them. If you can't replace them, then that's a bit of a problem.
Your problem is when you have to turn around, you stop your spiraling out, or you stop your the kind of linear expansion because of your losses you have to turn around. That's when it's a real problem. But
yeah, I'll be putting up a video coming up, and I can't say too much more, but I made a couple of risky expansion moves, and they went completely bad, just total wipeouts. So you lose an entire expansion army, and now you're back to, you know, square one. It happens. Sometimes the scout reports are just really off the mark. Sometimes things that you saw worked just don't.
I have a dreadful time with basic heavy infantry in the middle era. I always underestimate them because I treat light infantry. I mean, militia you just kind of ignore. Light infantry and heavy infantry, I kind of tend to treat them somewhat similarly, assessing the threat that they pose. Heavy infantry with a couple of lucky rolls can absolutely mess up your day.
Yes.
Because the broadsword's pretty good, and they aren't that easy to kill. So they get a couple of rounds of swinging at you. And I've made so many mistakes where I've just gone heavy infantry. Oh, there's nothing. It's just indie heavy infantry. Who cares?
So I've been moving a little towards, well, I put up a couple videos for Lerny and Hydra, and we were using bands. And, you can expand with 5 bands, but if things go wrong, you lose all 5, and you've lost the whole expansion party. If you wait for 8 or 9, very little ever causes you any grief, and you take a lot less attrition. We
and you're
also
picking up
chose
afflictions when you get hit really easily on vans too.
exactly, and while they have glamour and while they're hard to hit, if they get surrounded and harassed, then they start taking whacks, and
the
it
other thing
doesn't.
is that people, not every, you can't just be constantly looking at the afflictions in every unit or anything. But sometimes you don't realize that a thing that you're expanding with, like a unit of 6 or 7 cavalry, let's say, actually got 3 of those guys who've lost an arm. And so their offensive output is way down, or their shield's fallen off.
Right, yeah.
They're not. So you think you've got this really tough unit still, but actually it's become a bit defanged.
Exactly.
That happens with ogres quite a bit too, because they are prone to taking afflictions because of they rely on their hit points to keep them alive. But
right.
Yeah.
So this one's just malicious. So now if we
you'll
needed
pull through that one.
Yeah, so I can probably swap out 110 gold. Is it worthwhile to go bank? Oh, so they're down to 80. I think we're going to try one and just see where that sets us. It lets us afford 1 man-eater. Kind of go. The other thing I realized is the first time I did this, I blood hunted adjacent to the capital, and I should have realized it cost me resources that I desperately needed.
Right, yeah. It's the unrest is the main thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was from the unrest because I didn't have the spare gold to buy Noblar patrollers yet. So now okay, something's funny here. Where the heck do hunters come from? Because I thought they were forests. No, they're mountains, aren't they?
Mountains, yeah.
Okay, they're mountains. That's why.
Mountains. I think I used to have them be mountain and forest, but I think they're just mountains now. I'm going to double check that. I don't want to.
Well, that's no problem. They're not showing up here in the forest. See in a moment here when I get to the mountain. And then I won't bring this extra bunch here yet because I don't need it. Be nice to get a bruiser here pretty quick. Or I think I might swap out and get it. Oh, if I get the tyrant, it messes up everything else. So leave it like that for the time being.
Yeah, so the tyrant. So a thing that I'm trying to do in all of my mods is encourage people to some extent to make national leaders. Because it's a thing that annoys me that it doesn't happen in Dominions. I understand completely why you would never want to do it. Like, why would you waste your fort turns getting the centurion or whatever?
I buy
instead
them.
you just have whatever. I mean, sometimes you'll buy them, right? If you're in a situation where you're like, oh, I definitely need someone to lead this person around. If you're thinking about like Strategos, somebody like that, you get the morale bonus from doing that. But I want the military leaders to be kind of viable as much as I can, so I'm nudging people in that direction. Different things in the mods. I think you mentioned one province defense is surprisingly good for ogres because the bruiser is actually pretty tasty.
I watched some funny things, barbarian attacks and stuff like that, and the crazy bruiser just held off against everything. 40 hit points or whatever, and 2 attacks and reasonable protection. I mean,
I think he
for
might have
defense,
a length 3 weapon, or it's either length 2 or length 3. I can't. But
the
it
2.
could be he's repelling. Okay, yeah. So he can't get repelled by the barbarians, which helps, and he just
45 hit points, 19 protection, and so I have a question about how does Ogre Smash work? Like they're not 2 attacks; it's one or the other, right?
Oh, they do both on the first round. Well, they do both every round. It is 2 attacks. The best way to think about Ogre Smash is that it's basically just a fist attack that doesn't suck, or you could say it's like a headbutt. But you have a charge bonus on it, so the charge bonus isn't super relevant.
Oh, it's got a charge bonus. Okay.
Yeah, so your first round impact is better.
Right.
It isn't it's like the light lance in that you get the charge bonus the first time you battle, and thereafter it's another attack still.
Okay. But they're not as fast as cavalry, although the combat speeds are good. I like the combat speed of ogres.
Isn't that great. And it's length 0, which is sometimes a liability. Like if your opponent had a fire shield up, or if they're very good at repelling, if they're actually competent at repelling, then you're going to get repel hits, going to get tagged for that 1 damage and so on.
Right. Okay.
So it's just because the ogres just wade in, like throwing their fists around, headbutting, biting people, kicking them.
Here we are. Now we've got hunters.
The mountain province, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah,
They're
I was
very
kind
expensive outside of turmoil.
Yeah, but I was definitely noticing that the 1 PD was spectacularly successful. 6 PD was also quite good, but if we look at what you get for 6, well, that's quite a few bruisers. 4 bruisers and a bunch of Noblars. And I don't know why, and I didn't look at it in great detail, but I noticed that when PD was getting attacked, the Noblars seemed to shake off a lot of hits. Now they don't have great stats. Their defense is not amazing, but there's 6 of them in a square.
Exactly. They're very easy to underestimate, Noblars. Because so one of the things is you look at a Noblar and you look at a Markata, and you go, oh, okay, this is like a Markata, right? And you go, okay, but it's terrible. The Markata's got defense skill. Is it 13 or 14? It's high. It's
13, I think, now.
13. So he can dodge stuff. This has got defense skill 9, so it's going to get hit, right? And they do get hit, and they do die. Markata, I believe, costs 5 gold. Noblars cost 3. Noblars are better at hitting. They actually do kill things.
Yeah, their damage is significantly higher.
Yeah. And they've got a bit of extra protection as well, which can make a little bit of a difference to arrows and things not one-shotting them. They're surprisingly okay, and that's the thing that you see when they're in the PD. You think they're going to do nothing, but actually a couple of squares of them can stab somebody up pretty nasty.
Well, and they take some of the hits away from the bruiser. So a handful of these, and the bruiser sits there and smacks things silly. And these things take some of the hits, and it doesn't get harassed so badly. So it actually shakes off more attacks. So I saw, 6 PD of Ogre PD is really quite difficult to kill.
So I would definitely recruit some Noblars when you're taking the heavy cavalry province, which is the one north of the farm north of the cap there, because you can very cheap. I would buy maybe like 8, 10, 12 of them, put them at the front. In fact, you don't need, if you can get it exactly right, you only need 6 of them, because you just want them to take the lance hits.
Wolf just dropped in, and you can't see the comment, but he commented that rather than comparing to Markata, compare them to the Bakemono with Yaris. And yes, Yari Bakamoni do a job. They do a serious job. So now these Noblars are not as good as the Bakemono with Yari, but they work. They definitely work.
Though, I think.
Yeah. So alrighty then. Now where are we at? So we've got quite a bit more resources. We've got 1 Mournfang. So we're just about ready to roll out a second. But we have to buy a leader to do it. So I'm kind of guessing I would probably do a Tyrant now. That lowers us on resources a bit, but we can forward 1 Mournfang, a couple of Man-Eaters, get 1 more Iron Gut. And then probably now is a chance to grab a few Noblars. And we might be ready to take these barbarians out. This army, I'm thinking, clear this
what's
militia.
That on the west? Just militia. Yeah, they'll roll militia.
Yeah. Okay.
They have no problem with that.
So this expansion is significantly better with a more scales-oriented build, much better production.
Yeah.
And losses are lower.
To worry about. So what I always think about with expansion, there's like 3 things, right? There's the speed that you can expand. There's the amount of territory you can encircle, so that when the expansion phase is ending for people, you still can go back and backfill. The encircling is all about not having to ever turn around, just keep going, so no attrition. I don't think the ogres are that good at that, because they will take attrition. I think they've got good speed for grabbing lots of provinces. I think the thing that I worry about with them is the capability in your first war of the things that you've been using to expand against the things the enemy has been using to expand.
Yeah.
That's where I think Bulls, and to a lesser extent Man-Eaters, things like that, that's where they fall down a little bit. They'll get repelled is the big problems against elite troops.
Right. Yeah, so a few Mournfangs could make a significant difference to that. So we've got two of them.
I think they can win you a keep. One Mournfang, I think, set kind of far and back into the left or right,
Right.
Set to attack rear. Because when when it gets there, it's going to survive. Even if it gets caught in a few things, it'll just kill them.
Yeah.
And it can beat up commanders, no problem.
Well, I'm happier with this set of scales. I think you could play with the Bless, you could play with which chassis you use, whatever. But this is a much more satisfactory set of scales. Turmoil with at least 1 or 2 production, definitely growth and some luck. Whether or not you do magic's not so critical because you can pump out the hench fiends.
Yeah, so I mean, there's 2 ways of looking at the magic scale for ogres. One of them is to say we're going to make a lot of hench fiends, right? That's basically where your research is going to come. And in general, your researchers are not high research value per commander point or per commander that you've got. Kind of many of them and relatively low research. I think hench fiends have they're 2-path, so
they come in fire 2. The cost for them?
Points? Oh, how many RP they have in neutral scales?
They're 9, I think, basic.
If you look in the nation overview, I think we can just see.
Oh right, yes.
Someone's been. I think you mentioned this in a previous video, but this is something I'm going to try to do for all of my nations. In a way, it'd be nice if someone did a mod for this for all the vanilla nations.
Here they are.
Show everything they get.
Yeah, their base is 9.
Yeah, 9. Yeah.
And 9 is fine for a cost of 16 slaves. Once you've started some blood hunting. Right.
Although hunting slaves is itself a form of long-term gold loss.
It is
a good way to think about it.
Yes, it is. So this works as you were, and you did bring up the other point. If we look for a moment here at research, I mean, your targets aren't really all that difficult. So
it can feel difficult for the ogres.
It
Once
can.
You get going, they're not.
But you're really starting to crank up your capabilities once you get to 3. Now, we did talk about would it be funny to go for a larger bless for maw flesh, which I don't know if it's worth a bless, but it was funny. The idea of these guys would be what then? I think they'd be size 5. So they're swallowing everything, which would be a very funny option.
Yeah, they do have, of course, the disadvantage with swallow. Even if you land it on something fantastic, you have to stay alive to digest it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you get chopped open, it springs out like.
Maw guts. Yeah, maw guts. So these guys start at a 4. If you went larger, they've got built-in regen. They would be very funny at that kind of size. And of course, if you could buff them at all, it helps a great deal. But we were laughing at some of the stuff that I had going with when I was running some of these maw guts, just swallowing cavalry. It reminds me of the shenanigans with the enlarged flying gelatinous cubes that we've been watching in the tournament. Those are funny.
It's the funniest thing in the world when they swallow like an elf, a bannerbog or something. It's very satisfying. Lucid's going to like that if he's still listening.
Yeah, swallow is
an elf.
Swallow. Now, the one thing I didn't get, a couple of things I didn't get anywhere near to trying were scrap launchers and slave giants.
Yeah, super difficult to evaluate, super difficult to use. If you think of elephants as being a thing that you have to be kind of practiced at and a little bit sweaty to use properly, slave giants are like elephants on steroids for trying to use properly. They are.
Yeah, and they cost 3.5 times as much as an elephant.
They're incredibly unreliable. Like, it's so difficult to predict what's going to happen with them because if you look at the heavy chains attack, so it's got area effect too,
but
it means they can hit themselves.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I used these in the past back in Dom 3, and I suicided almost every time I tried to use them. They are very tricky. Now, the scrap launcher, I guess, basically, how many do they shoot? 20 attacks.
Compare it with short bows. I mean, you have to just compare it with like a big set of short bows or something.
Yeah, so each one is more or less the equivalent of 20 short bows, basically. Although I think the range is significantly
less
higher.
Accurate.
Yeah.
Better range. I think short bows are range 30
or 35. I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's less accurate. It's starting precision 7, and they throw it -2, so I think it's got precision 5 on them. Yeah.
Well, my thinking was the only time I wouldn't start bringing these out until the AI came at me with really big mobs, so that then there was so many targets they couldn't miss. Prior to that, I don't see the use, and I didn't take a game far enough to sort of reach that point where I was trying to kill very large amounts of chaff. But if you needed to kill very large amounts of chaff and arrow fend was not up, these would be cost effective, because 20 short bows would cost you 200 gold. These are only 145.
I'll tell you another interesting thing. Property of having very bad precision on a ranged attack is that if you have some scrap launchers and you're telling them fire archers, some of them fire archers, some of them fire none, some of them fire cavalry, and you can vary it up a little bit if you've got a few squads of them. You will get a big coverage of just crap flying all over the enemy's ranks.
Right.
And you will get some mages sometimes with it, which you can't do if you're too accurate, because it'll cluster on what they're actually, because you can't target the mages directly. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Sometimes you can hit mages with them, because they're so inaccurate. They just go all over the place.
Well, and siege bonus, what's the siege bonus? Well, 4, that's not huge.
Nah, I'd rather have just a bunch of militia if I was going after siege.
Yeah, this is not terribly cost effective. A siege strength of 8 for 145 gold, that's not actually terribly good.
Yeah, I think bulls are okay for sieging, and
like 2.3. Yeah, that's quite solid.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Noblars are 0.4 for 3 gold or something.
0.5
for 3 gold.
Well, this is the 5 gold ones.
Okay,
so yeah, gold per siege strength is usually the magic number, and you can work it out various ways.
Yeah,
Wolf made a comment. This is a lot of national spells. Yeah, it's a lot of spells in blood. Quite a few.
There's a couple in
conjuration. And these are useful. They're quite interesting. Oh, ET Shaman is only 13 nature gems to summon.
Yep.
But you've got to put a lab up in a mountain.
Yep.
And the ET pair.
They're very cheap. And they're pretty good mages, and you'll want quite a few of them just to get the randoms.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'm hoping that 13 nature is okay. It's aggressively priced, is what I would say, to try and.
That's aggressively priced for a 4-path mage. Usually 4-path mages are in the 30 to 40. I'm thinking of.
Still have to pay the gold upkeep though.
Right. Well, and you also have to get that lab in a not necessarily a place you'll find. So I didn't get around to
some of them, which is,
right.
Hunter or a Yeti. I mean, it's not hard to get into.
No, it's every second hunter. But the other interesting one, if we're looking at the national spells, I thought was I was trying out the saber tusks, and 7 for 5 is very good for a hunter. And I could see
lions that can follow orders.
Right.
That's what saber tusks are.
And I could see some uses for them. My attempts to use them were terribly successful. But it's just the 3. Oh no, and you got the other one. You can actually call your own Mournfangs. So 5 for 7. And I didn't look to see. Well, we could see that if we pop out to the national overview.
Yeah, I think I've got the I've got Mournfangs in there. Yeah,
there they are. So these are pretty good. They are undisciplined, but 2 attacks, very high damage, lots of hit points, not much protection, but they're animals. They're also still stealthy, and you've got Now, one thing I noticed, you've got a lot of survivals for the ogres. So their
Yeah.
mobility around, with snow move, 3 survivals. I'm assuming hunters have the same survivals. They do.
Yep.
And then saber tusks, they also have the
Yep.
same survivals and snow moves. So you start putting groups of those together and scooting around the map. There's things you could do. Definitely things you could do.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you take your hunters, particularly N2 hunters, and maybe this is for your second war, not for the first war. They're stealthy. You can lead a group of saber tusks with them. Saber tusk can be set to hold attack. You put the hunter and the saber tusks in the back corner. You have them throw protection on there. I think you protection with N2.
Maybe enlarge. You could enlarge. You could do.
Yeah.
You could do protection.
Yeah,
and then,
do that with the saber tusk Mournfangs. That'll beat a little bit of PD, and it's stealthy, so you can elf somebody.
Another thing you might want to do with hunters is you might want to make lion pelts with the earth nature randoms.
Like, lion pelts are pretty good for ogres.
Yeah, lion pelts are just good for keeping magi alive. I tend to throw lion pelts on any important magi as one of the cheapest solutions to, because you get a hat and a body for 5 gems. Now you're unlikely to have hammers.
Yeah, you might trade for one. I think that you'll probably be able to trade for hammers and things as the game goes along, because someone will want to break into blood.
Right.
Right. Go, hey, I've got a bunch of blood slaves. I mean, you can even use your cap income. If you're happy with your Dominion spread, you can turn off the sacrifice, and you've got cap income is not a thing for early on doing some trades. I get someone to be interested in that, but I think you want to get the blood economy going. That's your mid game. Your early game is your ogres. Your mid game is the blood economy, and maybe like Yeti thugs. And then late game is obviously you completely switch over to the blood economy, I would say, because you just want to turn your entire land into into kind of a
this is
blood economy inferno.
This is one of the strongest blood nations I've ever seen. I think it's got more blood, more capability than Mictlan, because I believe both your...
It doesn't have as good national summons for blood as Mictlan.
No.
As, early and late Mictlan.
But you've got... you don't have built-in dousing, but you're not going to have any problems making sanguine dousing rods. You've got all the standard blood forging. And these guys are more expensive.
You want to go to construction 4 anyway. So
you do.
Like,
you do.
It's going to be free, basically.
Yeah, you need that. So we're coming up to an hour. This is kind of a good length for this. I might continue with other things, but
I can't see the chat log, but we got any.
Yeah, no more questions from the chat log. There weren't all that many people watching today. That's fine. The only thing you mentioned is what was it called? The maw. The maw is gone. See, I was looking for trying to have to make the maw that I had remembered.
So back in Dominions 3, a mechanic I went with for the nation is that you could summon up an immobile, kind of like a hungry mouth in the ground, maw pit, and then that would take over doing your blood sacrifices for you. It was it could move a few provinces the first turn it was summoned, and then it became immobile.
That's right. That's what I remember.
And then that would take over your blood sacrifices. But I pretty much found that the AI couldn't cope with it, and I always try to make my nations as AI friendly as I can while still making them interesting. And I found that it was just kind of an inelegant way of doing things, and I preferred to have the ogres just have adept sacrificer, and I'd also by that point made the forgot Morgut, which is kind of like taking the idea of a hole in the ground, and instead of it being a hole in the ground that's stationary, which is kind of a bit weird in like what are you doing when you're attacking it? It's just a bit strange. And I thought it's more interesting if it's a giant maw in the belly of a dead ogre that's just controlling them and making them walk around.
If I remember correctly, you also couldn't fort if you had a maw in the ground, right? Couldn't have a maw and a fort.
I,
Is that,
I
is that
can't
correct?
remember. This is back in. I mean, this is back in Dominions 2. I can't
I
remember
know
exactly
this
how
is
I did it.
11 years ago. I seem to remember that though, because I remember something about struggling to keep the maws alive because they were very vulnerable to attacks, and I couldn't defend them very effectively.
Yeah.
Now, maybe, but anyways, so you've removed that, and then so we've talked about the maw gut.
I think
This
another
is the become maw flesh. One thing we didn't really mention. I should look at these maw fiends just briefly.
only 40 slaves, so you're kind of in the world of comparing them with some of the Mictlan blood summons for commanders and vampires. I think vampires are
Oh,
66.
yeah, these
These
are
for 40 slaves are extremely good.
yeah, and they're a little bit comparable to an Anakwi, a little
Yeah.
bit, or a little bit comparable to a vampire lord with fire magic. What are the randoms? Oh, excellent randoms.
They can break you into vampire lords because they can easily get to a D3 B3 on them fairly straightforwardly.
Right. Well, and then you can make a skull staff. You're not going to have any problems making blood thorns. So yeah, yeah, these are interesting. I didn't get to them yet, so it'll be interesting. I think I'm gonna end my little showcase with this episode because, as I mentioned, I'm not trying to do an overwhelming review of Mod Nations with these. I'm just trying to give a hey, here's a cool thing, here's some flavor, go for it. See what you can do.
Yeah, I appreciate people watching these, and I'd encourage you to seek out my mods and have a play with them. I hope they're fun. That's I make them for my own enjoyment, but I like other people to enjoy them too.
Oh, of
Um,
course, yeah. We want to, if we're gonna make things and share them on the internet, you really want people to see it, find it, and play with it.
yeah, I just get a kick out of it. It's nice seeing people use them.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
I've got links in all the descriptions for these that reference back to your page on Dominion's mods. And there should be enough links people can find the mods Discord if they want as well.
sure. I'm also making my own YouTube videos at the
That's
moment,
correct.
which are showing 12 nation Warhammer game. So all the nations are Warhammer nations that I've made or I'm currently updating, and I'm doing a kind of a let's play of the Skaven there. But the ogres are in that game as well, so interesting to see
Well,
what they get up to there.
people could find you through my subscriptions. And Lucid just said thanks for the episode, and thank you, Lucid, for dropping by. And
Yeah, you're welcome,
Wolf,
dude. I love your videos, so it's nice to hear from you.
so you'll see links to Sombre's YouTube and the Discord, the mods Discord. Of course, my Discord's available. Could jump you over there. So thanks everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm gonna call it done. Thanks a bunch, Sombre.
Thanks.